You don't belong in this line. The words cut through the polished silence of the first-class check-in area, like a knife scraping glass. A few heads turned. A rolling suitcase stopped mid-stride. Someone holding a paper cup of airport coffee froze halfway through a sip. The woman behind the marble counter did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. The certainty in her tone carried across the quiet section of Denver International Airport, reserved for the wealthy and the well-dressed. Her name tag read, Karen Whitmore. Late 40s. Perfect hair sprayed into place. Navy blazer with gold trim. The kind of woman who had spent decades deciding who looked important and who did not. And right now she was staring at two young men standing in front of her like they had just tracked mud across a white carpet. Marcus Carter didn't react immediately. He stood there calmly, one hand resting on the strap of a worn leather duffel bag slung across his shoulder. 28 years old, tall, lean, dreadlocks tucked beneath a dark knit beanie. A faded grey hoodie hung loose across his frame, like he had grabbed it off the floor 5 minutes earlier. Beside him stood his younger brother, Jordan Carter, 23. Athletic build, black tracksuit, headphones around his neck, sunglasses still on, even though they were indoors. To anyone watching from a distance, they looked like two college kids who had wandered into the wrong part of the airport. The first-class section of Skybridge Airlines was quiet for a reason. Thick carpet swallowed footsteps. Soft aints played from hidden speakers. Even the lighting seemed softer here, designed to flatter expensive suits and polished shoes. Marcus slowly lifted his eyes to Karen. "Morning," he said, voice calm. "We're checking in for the London flight." Karen didn't smile. Her eyes moved slowly from his beanie to the frayed cuffs of his hoodie, down to the scuffed sneakers on his feet. Then she looked at Jordan, then at the single bag. No luggage carts, no designer suitcases, no leather briefcases. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This counter," she said carefully, "is for first-class passengers." Jordan shifted his weight. "Yeah," he replied. "We know." Karen leaned back slightly, folding her arms. The gold wings pinned to her lapel caught the bright terminal lights. "I think you boys are looking for the economy check-in," she said. "That's back past the Starbucks. Long line. You can't miss it." A few people standing nearby glanced over. A businessman in a charcoal suit paused beside the rope barrier, watching with quiet interest. Marcus remained still. For a moment he just studied her face. Not angry, not offended, just measuring. Then he reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out his phone. "We're on flight SB402, he said. "First class. Carry on only." The screen lit up with a boarding pass, a black background, a silver emblem. Karen didn't even glance at it. Instead, she sighed. The sound was long and theatrical, the way a teacher sighs before explaining something painfully obvious to a stubborn child. "Sir," she said slowly, "people try this all the time." Marcus lowered the phone slightly. "Try what?" "Walking into the premium line, hoping no one notices." Jordan let out a quiet laugh. "You serious?" Karen's eyes hardened. "I've worked this desk for 15 years, she said. "I know what a first-class passenger looks like." The businessman nearby shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Marcus glanced down briefly at his phone screen again. Then he held it out. "Just scan it," he said. Karen didn't move. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but she didn't reach for the scanner. Instead, she leaned slightly forward across the counter. Her voice dropped lower. "I'm going to save everyone some time," she said. Her eyes flicked toward the security guard, standing 20 feet away, near the luggage scale. A large man with a shaved head and thick arms folded across his chest. Rick Dalton, 40 years old. Bored expression, waiting for something interesting to happen. Karen looked back at Marcus. "You two are not flying first class today." The words landed heavy. Jordan slid his sunglasses down his nose slightly. "And how would you know that?" Karen smiled faintly. Not a friendly smile. The kind that appears right before a door is slammed shut. "Because," she said, "first-class passengers usually don't show up dressed like they just rolled out of a gym." A couple standing nearby exchanged a quick glance. Marcus felt Jordan tense beside him. He could practically hear the shift in his younger brother's breathing. Marcus lifted a hand slightly, not looking at Jordan. Just a subtle signal. "Easy." Jordan exhaled slowly through his nose. Marcus turned back to Karen. "Scan the code," he said again. For the first time, Karen's patience snapped. Her hand slapped lightly against the counter. "I said no." The sound echoed louder than expected in the quiet section. Rick Dalton straightened where he stood. Karen gestured with her chin. "Rick." The guard began walking toward them. Slow steps, heavy boots against the carpet. Marcus watched him approach. The camera of the moment seemed to slow down. The distant hum of the airport, the low murmur of travelers, the squeak of a suitcase wheel somewhere behind them. Rick stopped just beside Marcus, close enough that Marcus could smell cheap aftershave and coffee. "What's the problem?" Rick asked. Karen didn't hesitate. "These two are refusing to leave the first-class area." Rick looked Marcus up and down. His eyes lingered on the hoodie, then the sneakers, then the bag. Marcus met his gaze calmly. "We're checking in for our flight," Marcus said. Rick nodded slowly. "Economy lines that way." Jordan shook his head. "You people really doing this?" Karen's voice sharpened. "They're being disruptive." Rick stepped closer. One thick hand lifted and pressed flat against Jordan's chest. Not violent, but firm. "Take a step back," Rick said. Jordan didn't move. The space between them tightened. For a moment the air felt electric. Jordan looked down at the hand on his chest, then back up. "Don't touch me." Rick pushed slightly harder. "Step back." The duffel bag slid off Marcus's shoulder and hit the floor with a heavy thud. A few more people turned now. Phones quietly appeared. Marcus lifted both hands slowly. "Easy," he said. His voice was calm. Too calm. He bent down, picked up the bag, and slung it back over his shoulder. Then he looked at Karen. Really looked at her, memorizing her face. "You sure you want to do this?" he asked quietly. Karen's fingers began tapping rapidly on the keyboard. "I'm flagging your reservation," she said. Her voice carried a strange excitement now, the thrill of authority. "You won't get past security." She hit the key with a sharp click. And for the first time that morning, Marcus Carter's calm expression hardened. Just slightly. Just enough that anyone truly paying attention might have realized something important. Something Karen Whitmore had completely missed. This was not a man trying to sneak into first class. This was a man deciding how far he was willing to let this mistake go. Karen Whitmore pressed the final key with a sharp tap, the sound small but final, like a judge lowering a gavel. The monitor in front of her blinked once. A red tag appeared across the reservation line. Disruptive passenger. Marcus Carter watched the glow of the screen reflect faintly in her glasses. For a second, the entire scene felt oddly quiet, as if the airport itself had taken a slow breath and was waiting to see what would happen next. Rick Dalton still stood beside them, one thick arm slightly raised, ready if things escalated. His posture had shifted from boredom to alertness, the way security guards straighten when they sense trouble might finally break the monotony of their shift. Jordan Carter let out a low laugh that carried more disbelief than humor. "You just flagged our tickets?" he said. Karen didn't look up. Her fingers continued moving across the keyboard. "I documented your behavior," she replied coolly. "Standard procedure when passengers refuse to follow instructions." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her face the way someone studies a complicated machine. He noticed the tiny twitch in the corner of her mouth, the faint satisfaction in her eyes. She wasn't nervous. Not yet. In her mind, this situation was already over. "Let me understand something," Marcus said quietly. "You refused to scan our boarding passes. Then you called security. Now you've marked us as disruptive." Karen finally looked up. "Yes? And you're comfortable with that decision?" Her chin lifted slightly. "Very." Jordan shook his head slowly. The movement was almost tired, like someone watching a slow train wreck they knew they couldn't stop. "Man," he muttered under his breath, "this is wild." Rick cleared his throat. "All right," he said, trying to keep things moving. "You heard the lady. Time to head to the economy line." Marcus didn't move. His eyes remained on Karen. "You ever check the passenger manifest before doing something like this?" he asked. Karen's expression hardened again. "Sir, I don't need a lecture about my job." Marcus nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Behind them, the businessman in the charcoal suit had shifted closer to the rope barrier. He checked his watch, then glanced toward Karen with a mild look of impatience. "Is there a problem here?" he asked. Karen's entire demeanor changed in a heartbeat. The tension melted from her shoulders. Her smile returned, bright and practiced. "Oh, no problem at all, Mr. Harrison," she said warmly. "Just clearing up a misunderstanding." The man nodded, satisfied, but his eyes lingered briefly on Marcus and Jordan, with a look that wasn't quite curiosity, and wasn't quite sympathy either. Karen's friendly expression vanished the moment she turned back. "Rick," she said, "please escort them away from the counter." Rick gestured toward the main terminal. "Let's go." Jordan took a step back, not because Rick pushed him this time, but because Marcus placed a hand lightly on his arm. "Easy," Marcus murmured. Jordan leaned closer to him. "We should call Dad right now," he whispered. Marcus's gaze remained fixed on Karen. "Not yet." Jordan blinked. "Not yet." Marcus shook his head slightly. "I want to see something." Rick shifted impatiently. "You two heading out or what?" Marcus finally picked up his duffel bag from the floor and adjusted the strap over his shoulder. Then he looked at Karen one more time. "You really think this is the smart move?" he said. Karen crossed her arms. "I think it's the correct one." Marcus nodded slowly. "All right." He turned away from the counter. Jordan followed, still shaking his head as they stepped out of the velvet-roped area and back into the louder chaos of the main terminal. The noise hit them immediately. Rolling luggage, distant gate announcements, the smell of burnt airport coffee drifting through the air. Rick watched them go for a moment, then turned back toward Karen. "You want me to keep an eye on them?" he asked. Karen waved him off dismissively. "They'll figure it out once they get to TSA and their boarding passes turn red." Rick chuckled and returned to his post. Behind them, Marcus and Jordan walked through the terminal crowd in silence for several seconds. Jordan finally spoke first. "You're way too calm right now." Marcus shrugged slightly. Jordan stopped walking. "She flagged us, Marcus. TSA's going to see that note." Marcus glanced down at his phone, checking the time. "I know. And you're still not calling Dad." Marcus started walking again. Jordan hurried to catch up. "She thinks she blocked the reservation," Marcus said quietly. Jordan frowned. "Didn't she?" Marcus shook his head. "No." They reached the escalator leading down toward the security checkpoints. Hundreds of travelers filled the area below, forming long, snaking lines under bright fluorescent lights. Jordan leaned closer as they stepped onto the moving stairs. So what did she actually do? Marcus slid his phone into his hoodie pocket. "She added a comment to the reservation," he said. "Gate agents can do that, but she can't cancel it." "Why not?" Marcus's voice stayed calm, almost conversational. "Because our booking isn't a regular ticket." Jordan looked at him. "What does that mean?" Marcus glanced down at the moving steps beneath them, then back toward the security line ahead. "The PNR is locked." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Locked by who?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched a family struggling with a stroller at the bottom of the escalator. The father looked exhausted. The mother looked ready to cry. Their toddler was wailing at a pitch that cut through the noise of the terminal. Marcus stepped off the escalator and waited for Jordan beside the TSA pre-check entrance. "Executive-level clearance," he finally said. Jordan blinked. Then he laughed once, quietly. "Oh." Now he understood. The line for TSA pre-check moved quickly. Travelers removed laptops, placed belts in plastic bins, shuffled forward under the watchful eyes of uniformed agents. Marcus and Jordan reached the automated boarding pass scanner. Marcus held his phone under the glass. The machine beeped. A red light flashed. The TSA agent standing nearby frowned and motioned them aside. "Step over here for a second," the agent said. Jordan gave Marcus a look that said, "See." Marcus remained calm. The agent scanned the screen again, reading the information displayed in front of him. "Looks like the airline marked your reservation," he said. "Says here there was an incident at the check-in counter." Jordan folded his arms. Marcus leaned slightly toward the monitor. "Check the passenger name," Marcus said quietly. The agent squinted at the screen. "Marcus Carter," he read. "Jordan Carter." He scrolled down. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed slightly. There was another line below the reservation number. Carrier code. Internal status flag. The agent blinked. He leaned closer to the screen. For the first time, his posture changed. "Wait a second," he murmured. He looked up at Marcus, then back at the monitor, then up again. "Carter," he repeated slowly. Marcus didn't say anything. The agent's voice dropped. "As in Richard Carter?" Jordan pulled his sunglasses down slightly and smiled. "Yeah," he said. "That Carter." The TSA agent stared at the screen for several seconds without moving. The red warning box still glowed on the monitor. Disruptive passenger report filed by airline staff. But below it sat another line most agents never saw in their entire careers. Internal clearance status. Chairman priority. The young agent swallowed slowly. His name tag read Tyler Grant. Early 20s. Probably still new enough to the job that surprises like this hit him hard. He looked back up at Marcus Carter. The hoodie, the worn sneakers, the duffel bag. Then back at the screen. Jordan watched the entire calculation happening behind the man's eyes. Tyler leaned closer to the keyboard, lowering his voice. "You're Richard Carter's sons." Marcus didn't answer right away. Around them, the security line kept moving. Plastic bins sliding across rollers. Passengers stepping through scanners. The low, constant hum of an airport that never truly stopped. Finally, Marcus nodded once. Tyler let out a breath that sounded half laugh, half disbelief. "Man," he muttered quietly, "you have got to be kidding me." Jordan folded his arms. "We wish." Tyler rubbed a hand across the back of his neck, still staring at the screen. "Karen Whitmore flagged you as disruptive," he said. Marcus's voice stayed calm. "That's what she told us." Tyler looked toward the terminal behind them, the direction of the first-class check-in area. "She called security?" Jordan nodded, "and tried to bounce us out of the first-class line." Tyler exhaled slowly through his nose. He typed a few commands on the keyboard. The system blinked. The red box remained. Tyler shook his head slightly. She didn't cancel the reservation. Marcus already knew that. "She can't," Marcus said. Tyler nodded. "Nope." He pointed at the monitor. "This booking is locked under executive clearance. Only corporate operations can override it." Jordan leaned against the counter. "So we're good?" Tyler hesitated. Technically they were. But the system still displayed the disruptive tag, which meant every gate agent down the line would see the note. He glanced back at Marcus again. "You want me to remove the comment?" Marcus shook his head immediately. "No." Tyler blinked. "No? Leave it exactly the way it is." Jordan turned his head slowly toward his brother. "You serious?" Marcus's eyes were steady. "Yes." Tyler looked confused. Most people would want that cleared. Marcus slipped his phone back into his pocket. "I want the record to show exactly what she did." Tyler stared at him for a moment longer. Then he nodded slowly. "All right." He entered a manual override code. The scanner light switched from red to green. "You're cleared through TSA," he said. Jordan grabbed his phone from the bin and slid it into his pocket. As they gathered their things, Tyler leaned slightly closer across the desk. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, I didn't see any aggression here. Marcus gave him a small nod. Appreciate that. Jordan slung the duffel bag back over Marcus's shoulder, and they walked toward the metal detectors. Behind them, Tyler watched for a few seconds before shaking his head and returning to his station. Back in the terminal, the mood shifted as they moved toward Gate B14. The adrenaline from the confrontation had faded, replaced by something colder. Jordan ran a hand across the back of his neck. "That woman really called us thugs," he said quietly. Marcus didn't respond. Passengers filled the seating area around the gate, some already lined up in boarding groups, others sat scrolling through phones or sipping overpriced drinks. The departure board above the gate read, Skybridge Airlines, Flight SB402, Destination, London. Status, boarding soon. Jordan noticed the first thing, before Marcus did. He slowed slightly. "Hey," he muttered. Marcus followed his gaze. Standing at the gate podium with her arms crossed was Karen Whitmore. She had left the check-in counter. She had come here, specifically to stop them. Her eyes locked onto them instantly. The expression on her face was not surprise. It was anger. She grabbed the microphone mounted to the podium. The loudspeaker crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen announced, her voice cutting through the gate area. "Boarding for flight SB402 will be delayed briefly." Passengers groaned. Karen pointed directly at Marcus and Jordan. "We have a security issue that needs to be addressed." Phones immediately lifted. Marcus kept walking. Jordan leaned closer to him. "You seeing this?" "Oh yeah." Karen stepped away from the podium as they approached. "I told you earlier," she said, loudly enough for half the gate area to hear. "You are not flying today." Marcus stopped 3 feet from the counter. "We cleared TSA," he said calmly. Karen gave a tight smile. "That won't matter." She picked up the phone on the desk. "Airport security to gate B14, she said. Several passengers nearby began whispering. Jordan glanced around at the growing attention. "You really doing this in front of everybody?" he asked. Karen turned toward the crowd. "These individuals forced their way past security earlier," she announced. Marcus blinked slowly. "Now that's just a lie." Karen ignored him. "They are attempting to board a first-class cabin without valid credentials." Jordan stepped forward slightly. "We have tickets." Karen laughed. "Tickets?" She looked them up and down again. "First-class tickets?" the crowd murmured. Marcus noticed something subtle then. A man standing near the front row of seats. Charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, silver hair. The same businessman from the check-in counter. "Mr. Harrison." The man watched silently, his expression now much more uncertain. Karen continued speaking. "This flight carries premium clients who expect a certain level of safety." Jordan frowned. "Safety?" Karen leaned forward across the counter. Her voice dropped, but the microphone still carried it. "First class is for professionals," she said. Then she smiled thinly. "Not for street thugs." The word landed heavy. The murmuring crowd went quiet. Several teenagers standing near the back immediately began live streaming. Marcus felt Jordan tense beside him. He slowly exhaled. Karen gestured toward the jet bridge door. "Rick!" she called. The guard from earlier appeared again at the edge of the gate area. Behind him this time were 2 uniformed airport police officers. Officer Daniel Brooks. and his partner. The officers approached with the calm, practiced steps of people used to being called into situations already spiraling out of control. Brooks looked at Marcus, then Jordan, hands visible, standing still. The crowd wasn't frightened. They were curious. Brooks turned toward Karen. "These the guys?" Karen nodded quickly. "They threatened me earlier at the counter. Then they pushed past security." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's not what happened." Brooks held up a hand. "Sir," he said calmly, "the airline has requested you leave the gate area." Jordan looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. Jordan spoke first. "We just want to get on our flight." Brooks's voice remained neutral. "If the airline refuses service, you can't board." Marcus reached slowly into his hoodie pocket. Instantly, Rick's hand moved toward the taser on his belt. "Hands where I can see them," he barked. Marcus froze. "I'm getting my phone." Rick hesitated. Brooks nodded slightly. Slowly. Marcus pulled the phone out and looked at the screen. Then he looked directly at Karen. "Let me make one call," he said quietly. Karen laughed again. "Go ahead," she said. Her voice dripped with sarcasm. "Call whoever you want." Marcus pressed the contact. The phone rang once, twice. Then a deep voice answered. "Marcus," the voice said, "you boys in London yet?" Marcus looked straight at Karen Whitmore. He said calmly, "We're still in Denver." "No," Marcus said calmly. "We're still in Denver." The voice on the other end paused. The pause was not confusion. It was the kind of silence powerful people use when they are already calculating consequences. Richard Carter's voice came back slower this time. "What happened?" Marcus kept the phone on speaker. The entire gate area could hear every word. "We're at gate B14, he said. "The gate supervisor here says we don't belong in first class. She called us thugs. She called airport police." Jordan folded his arms beside him, watching Karen Whitmore's expression carefully. Karen rolled her eyes, clearly unimpressed. "Your sons are causing a disruption," she said loudly toward the phone. "Whoever you are." The voice on the speaker did not respond immediately. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, phones lifted higher. Officer Brooks glanced between Marcus and Karen, his posture suddenly less certain. Then the voice returned. "Is the phone on speaker?" Marcus nodded slightly, even though the man on the other end couldn't see him. "Yes." "Good," Richard Carter said. "Let me speak to the woman." Karen stepped closer to the phone, still wearing the same smug expression. "This is Karen Whitmore," she said sharply, "gate supervisor for Skybridge Airlines. Your sons are refusing to leave the gate area." A quiet breath came through the speaker. Then the voice spoke again. "Karen Whitmore." It was not a question, just the slow repetition of her name. Karen's smile thinned slightly. "Yes. My name is Richard Carter." The entire gate area went still. Even the airport noise seemed to fade into the distance. Karen blinked. "So?" Marcus didn't move. Jordan tilted his head slightly, watching the moment unfold. The voice continued. "I am the chairman of Carter Global Holdings. Karen's eyes narrowed, trying to process the name. I own Skybridge Airlines. For one long second, Karen Whitmore looked like a person whose brain had simply stopped working. Her mouth opened slightly, closed again. Officer Brooks slowly turned his head toward Marcus. The businessman, Mr. Harrison, sat forward in his chair like someone suddenly realizing they were watching a train wreck in slow motion. Karen recovered just enough to speak. Well, her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. Well, sir, if that's true, then you should understand airline security protocols. Richard Carter cut her off. Protocol. The word was soft, but it carried across the entire gate. Does your protocol include insulting paying passengers because you don't like their clothing? Karen's face drained of color. That's not what happened, she said quickly. Marcus didn't interrupt. Jordan didn't speak. They simply watched. Officer Brooks shifted his weight uneasily. Richard Carter continued. Did my sons threaten you? Karen hesitated. The silence stretched. Officer Brooks finally spoke. They have been compliant since we arrived, he said toward the phone. Karen shot him a furious look. Richard Carter's voice returned. Officer, who am I speaking with? Daniel Brooks, Denver Airport Police. Officer Brooks, are my sons breaking any laws? Brooks answered without hesitation. No, sir. Another quiet pause. Have they assaulted anyone? No, sir. Damaged property? No. Richard Carter's voice hardened slightly. Then why are you there? Brooks glanced at Karen before answering. The gate supervisor reported trespassing. Marcus watched Karen carefully now. Her breathing had changed. Shorter. Faster. Richard Carter spoke again. My sons have first-class tickets for that flight. Yes, sir, Brooks said slowly. I can see that now. Good. The word landed like a final decision. Officer Brooks. Yes, sir. I would appreciate it if you remain there. Brooks blinked. To ensure their safety. Karen's head snapped toward Marcus, then toward the phone, then back again. Richard Carter continued calmly. My station manager for Denver should already be on his way. Jordan leaned closer to Marcus and whispered, Here we go. Across the gate area, passengers whispered among themselves. The teenagers streaming the scene had now gathered a small crowd behind them. Mr. Harrison stood up slowly from his chair. Karen tried one last time. Sir, with all due respect, this situation is disrupting an international flight with 300 passengers. Richard Carter interrupted again. I am aware. His voice had lost the softness now. Every word landed sharp. Captain. Everyone turned. The jet bridge door opened. A tall man with silver hair and 4 stripes on his shoulders stepped out onto the gate floor. Captain Douglas Reed. 58 years old. 30 years of flight experience. He walked toward the podium with visible irritation. What is going on? He asked. Karen pointed immediately. These 2 men are Captain Reed, Marcus said. The captain looked at him, then at the phone. Who's on the line? He asked. Marcus answered, simply. Richard Carter. Captain Reed froze. The recognition was immediate. His expression changed in a way only people who had worked under the same corporate structure for decades could understand. He stepped forward quickly and took the phone from Marcus. "Mr. Carter," he said. "Yes, Captain." Reed straightened unconsciously. "We're fully boarded. Tower is asking why we haven't pushed back." Richard Carter's voice was calm again. "Captain Reed, how long have you flown for my airline?" 20 years, sir." "Then you know I don't make empty statements." Reed swallowed slightly. "Yes, sir." "Do not move that aircraft." The words were quiet, but final. Reed blinked. "Sir." I said, "Do not push back from that gate." Karen stepped forward nervously. "Captain, we cannot delay an international departure because of—" Reed raised a hand without even looking at her. "Quiet." The word hit her like a slap. Richard Carter continued speaking through the phone. "That aircraft remains at the gate until further notice." Reed's face had gone pale. "Sir, if we miss this departure window, we could be grounded for hours. I don't care if you're grounded for a week." The sentence rolled through the speaker. Passengers near the gate gasped. Jordan leaned back slightly, enjoying the moment. Richard Carter's voice lowered. "If my sons are not welcome in seats 1A and 1B. He paused. The silence built. "Then nobody sits in them." Captain Reed closed his eyes briefly. Behind him the aircraft waited. 300 passengers, engines ready. Cabin doors still open. "Understood," Reed said quietly. He handed the phone back to Marcus. Then he turned slowly toward the gate microphone. Karen Whitmore stood frozen beside the podium. Her hands trembled slightly. Captain Reed pressed the button. His voice carried through the terminal. "Ladies and gentlemen." Passengers inside the aircraft and at the gate looked up. "This is Captain Reed." He took a breath. "I regret to inform you." He paused again. "Flight SB 402 to London has been cancelled." The explosion of noise that followed shook the entire terminal. 300 passengers realized their flight had just disappeared, and every single one of them began looking for someone to blame. Karen Whitmore was standing right in front of them. The silence lasted exactly 1 second. Then the gate exploded. "What do you mean, cancelled?" A woman in a beige coat jumped to her feet near the front row of seats. Her voice cut through the terminal like a fire alarm. "I have a wedding in Surrey tomorrow." Another man slammed his briefcase down on the floor. "I paid $12,000 for this ticket." The crowd inside the aircraft began spilling out of the jet bridge. Confused passengers poured into the gate area, dragging luggage behind them, phones already pressed to their ears. Within seconds, the noise rose into a roar. 300 people, realizing their international flight had just vanished, created a very specific kind of chaos. It began with disbelief, then anger, then the frantic search for someone to hold responsible. And standing closest to the podium, pale and frozen, was Karen Whitmore. Her eyes darted across the crowd as voices closed in. "You cancelled the flight? Is this some kind of joke? What the hell is going on?" Captain Reed stepped away from the microphone and rubbed his temple, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. Even after decades in aviation, he had never seen a situation like this. Karen grabbed his sleeve. "Captain, you can't be serious." Reed slowly turned toward her. "You heard the order." "But this is insane," she hissed. 300 passengers." The chairman gave a direct command. Karen's voice cracked. "Over 2 kids in hoodies?" Marcus heard the words. His eyes moved slowly toward her. Jordan let out a quiet breath beside him. She still doesn't get it. Officer Brooks remained near Marcus and Jordan, his posture now protective rather than confrontational. The shift had been subtle but unmistakable. Rick Dalton stood several feet away, no longer reaching for his taser. Now he looked like a man suddenly aware that the ground beneath his boots might be collapsing. Passengers crowded closer to the podium. The businessman, Mr. Harrison, stepped forward through the noise, his voice carried above the shouting. "Someone needs to explain why an international flight was just cancelled." Captain Reed looked at Marcus. Marcus lifted the phone slightly. "My father isn't finished," he said quietly. The words carried. The shouting dimmed just enough for people nearby to hear. Karen turned sharply. "What do you mean he's not finished?" Marcus placed the phone back to his ear. "Dad." "I'm still here," Richard Carter said. Marcus glanced around at the chaos unfolding. "You just grounded 300 people." "I know." Jordan smiled faintly. Karen's voice trembled now. "This is ridiculous. You cannot destroy an international flight schedule over a misunderstanding." Richard Carter responded calmly. "This was not a misunderstanding." He paused. "This was discrimination." The word landed heavy across the gate. Several passengers exchanged glances. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. Marcus spoke quietly into the phone. "It's getting loud here." "I imagine it is." The voice on the line shifted slightly. "Is the Denver station manager there yet?" Almost on cue, a short man came sprinting down the concourse. Arthur Langley, 52 years old. Station manager for Skybridge Airlines at Denver International Airport. He ran like a man chasing a fire, his tie loose and his face red from panic. He had received the alert 10 minutes earlier. A direct call from corporate operations marked Code Black. In airline language, that signal was reserved for disasters. He skidded to a stop in front of Marcus. "Mr. Carter," Langley gasped, bending slightly to catch his breath. He didn't even look at Karen. "Jordan, I am so sorry." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You just got it here?" Langley nodded quickly. "I was on the other side of the terminal." Marcus held out the phone. "Dad wants to talk to you." Langley took the phone with both hands. "Mr. Carter." "Arthur." Langley straightened. "Yes, sir." "Step 1, Richard Carter said calmly. Remove Karen Whitmore from the floor immediately." Langley didn't hesitate. He turned slowly toward Karen. The anger on his face was unmistakable. "Give me your badge." Karen stared at him. "What, your badge?" Her voice shook now. "Arthur, I was following protocol. There is no protocol for refusing a valid ticket holder." "She looked like..." Langley stepped closer. "Do not finish that sentence." Karen's eyes filled with sudden tears. "You can't fire me for enforcing dress standards." Langley's voice exploded. "There is no dress code for a paid first-class seat." The surrounding crowd went quiet again. Langley grabbed the lanyard hanging around her neck and pulled it free. Karen gasped as the badge snapped loose. "You're done here," he said coldly. Rick Dalton took a slow step backward. Officer Brooks crossed his arms. Marcus watched silently. Langley returned to the phone. "Sir, badge removed." "Good," Richard Carter said. "That was step 1. Langley swallowed. "Yes, sir. Now we move to step 2. Langley braced himself. "I want a full audit of every incident report Karen Whitmore has filed during the last 6 years. Langley blinked. "All of them?" "Yes." Karen shook her head desperately. "This is insane," she whispered. Richard Carter continued. "If she was comfortable profiling my sons, imagine how she treats ordinary passengers." Langley wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yes, sir." "And Arthur." "Yes." The voice on the phone hardened again. "Ground every outbound Sky Bridge flight from Denver for the next 4 hours. Langley nearly dropped the phone. "Sir," the word came out as a gasp. "That's 20 flights." "I know. That's thousands of passengers." "I know." Langley looked out across the gate. Passengers already angry about one cancellation were now watching him like a pack of wolves. "Sir, that could cost millions." Richard Carter's response was immediate. "I don't care about the money." His voice carried across the speaker. "I care about the message." Langley's face drained of color. "You want every gate agent in this airport to understand something," Richard Carter continued. "Respect is not optional." Marcus watched the crowd. Some passengers looked stunned. Others were beginning to realize this situation was bigger than a single cancelled flight. Jordan leaned closer to his brother. Dad just shut down the entire hub. Marcus nodded slowly. The noise around them began rising again. Passengers arguing, phones ringing, employees whispering. But Karen Whitmore no longer stood at the center of authority. She stood alone. Badge gone. Career collapsing. And she still had no idea that the worst part of this story had not even been discovered yet. Karen Whitmore's hands were shaking. Not the small, nervous tremor she had felt when the phone call began. This was different. This was the kind of shaking that started deep in the chest and moved outward until even the fingers refused to stay still. Around her, the gate area had turned into a storm. Passengers crowded the podium. Some shouted into phones. Others demanded refunds. Several were filming every second. Arthur Langley stood in the center of it, like a man trapped between 2 collapsing walls. The phone was still pressed to his ear. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. He paused, listening, then nodded. "Yes, I understand." Marcus watched him carefully. Jordan leaned against the railing beside the jet bridge entrance, arms folded, sunglasses pushed up onto his head now. His earlier anger had cooled into something else. Curiosity. Richard Carter's voice came through the phone again. "Arthur." "Yes, sir. I want that pledge signed before those flights move again." Langley swallowed. "I'll start printing immediately." "Good." The line went silent. Langley lowered the phone slowly and handed it back to Marcus. For a moment he just stood there breathing. Then he turned toward the growing crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, raising his voice above the noise, "we are addressing the situation." A man in a navy suit pointed angrily toward the jet bridge. "You cancelled a transatlantic flight!" "Yes, sir. My wife and I are supposed to be in London tomorrow morning." Langley nodded stiffly. "We will provide hotel accommodations." "That's not the point." More voices joined in. "You can't ground an entire airline hub. This is unbelievable." Karen Whitmore stood several steps behind Langley, clutching the strap of her purse like a lifeline. Her makeup had begun to run. 6 years. 6 years working that counter. 6 years building authority. And now it was dissolving in front of 300 witnesses. Rick Dalton avoided looking at her. Officer Brooks remained near Marcus and Jordan, quietly keeping the space around them clear as the crowd shifted closer. Jordan nudged Marcus. "You see this?" Marcus nodded slightly. "This isn't over." Langley turned back toward them. "I'm arranging lounge access for you both," he said quickly. Jordan smirked. "Suddenly, we belong there?" Langley winced. "I am truly sorry." Marcus shrugged. "Not your call." Langley nodded gratefully. Across the gate area, a cluster of passengers had gathered around Karen. One woman in a fur coat pointed directly at her. "You caused this." Karen shook her head rapidly. "The airline. You told us those men were trespassing." Karen looked toward Marcus. He was standing calmly near the podium, watching. The woman's voice rose. "My flight just disappeared because you couldn't do your job." Karen stepped back. "I was following procedures." The businessman, Mr. Harrison, walked slowly toward the group. He studied Karen with quiet disappointment. "Were you?" Karen looked at him desperately. "They threatened me." Jordan laughed. The sound carried across the gate. "No, we didn't." Mr. Harrison's eyes moved toward Marcus and Jordan. He remembered the moment earlier at the check-in counter. The hoodie, the quiet confidence, and the way he himself had assumed Karen must be right. He looked down briefly. Langley's radio crackled suddenly. "Arthur." Langley grabbed it. "Yes?" A voice came through the speaker. "Operations just ran the seat manifest for flight SB402. Langley frowned. "And?" "There's a problem." The gate noise faded slightly as several employees turned toward the radio. Langley stepped aside from the crowd. "What kind of problem?" "Seats 1A and 1B. Langley glanced instinctively toward Marcus. "What about them? They were released from corporate block earlier today." Langley's brow tightened. "That's impossible. System log shows a manual override." Langley's stomach tightened. "Who authorized it?" The radio crackled again. There was a short pause. Then the voice answered. "Gate Supervisor ID code." Langley slowly turned his head. Karen Whitmore stood frozen 10 feet away. The realization hit him like a hammer. Karen. She looked up. Her face went pale instantly. Langley walked toward her slowly. "What did you do?" Karen shook her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." Langley's voice dropped. Seat 1A and 1B were locked under corporate block. Karen's breathing quickened. "You manually released them." The crowd around them went quiet again. Marcus watched the scene unfold. Jordan leaned closer. "Oh, this just got interesting." Langley pulled a tablet from the gate desk and opened the system log. The screen reflected in his glasses. 1 entry, 1 time stamp, 1 employee ID. He looked up. Who are the Stantons? Karen blinked. Who? Langley rotated the tablet toward her. 2 names appeared on the screen. Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Stanton. Buddy Pass, first class upgrade. Karen's lips trembled. Langley's voice turned cold. They're sitting in seats 1A and 1B. Jordan's eyebrows lifted. You sold our seats? Karen's eyes filled with panic. No. Langley scrolled further. Payment record. Cash note. $500 each. Langley looked back up slowly. You charged them. Karen's voice cracked. I thought those seats would stay empty. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Silence dropped across the gate. Marcus stepped forward slightly. You thought nobody would show up. Karen looked at him with desperation now. The block said chairman priority, she said quickly. But those seats are always empty. Jordan laughed again. Not today. Karen's breathing turned ragged. I panicked when you showed up. Langley stared at her. You called security. Karen's voice rose suddenly. I had to. The words echoed across the terminal. If the scanner read their passes, the system would have flagged the double booking. Several passengers gasped. Mr. Harrison closed his eyes briefly. Karen's voice broke. I was going to lose my job. Langley stepped closer. You're going to lose a lot more than that. Officer Brooks moved forward. You sold corporate seats. Karen shook her head frantically. I can fix it. Marcus spoke quietly. No, you can't. Langley lifted his radio again. Airport police. Yes. We need officers at gate B14. Karen grabbed his arm. Arthur, please. He pulled away. You called the police on innocent passengers to cover a scam. Karen's knees nearly buckled. Rick Dalton stared at the floor. Jordan looked at Marcus. Dad's not even here, and she still managed to dig a deeper hole. Marcus watched Karen silently, because now the truth was out, and the consequences had only just begun. Karen Whitmore's voice broke before the words even left her mouth. I can explain. The sentence sounded thin against the rising noise of the terminal. 300 stranded passengers stood within earshot. Dozens of phones were still recording. Every eye in the gate area had turned toward her. Arthur Langley didn't blink. You sold corporate seats, he said again, slower this time. Karen shook her head, tears sliding down the edges of her mascara. I didn't sell them, she insisted weakly. I just released the block. Langley held up the tablet. The screen glowed between them. Manual override, employee ID, seat reassignment, cash notation. The truth was sitting there in cold digital lines. Jordan leaned toward Marcus. She really thought the system wouldn't log that. Marcus's voice stayed low. People who run small scams usually think the world is small, too. Officer Brooks stepped forward. Ma'am, he said, calm but firm. I'm going to need you to step away from the gate podium. Karen looked at him as if the words were coming from underwater. What? You're no longer authorized to operate in this area. Her gaze darted toward the passengers. toward the captain, toward Rick Dalton. No one moved to help her. Langley's voice hardened. "Karen." She turned slowly. "You called airport police on 2 innocent passengers to hide a fraud." Karen's breathing quickened. "I panicked." Jordan snorted quietly. Langley gestured to the officers approaching from the concourse. 2 more airport police had arrived. Officer Brooks nodded to them. "Over here." The new officers moved through the crowd, their presence clearing space the way gravity clears air around a falling object. Karen took a step backward. "I didn't steal anything," she said. Langley's face tightened. "You charged 2 passengers $500 each." Karen's head shook violently. "It wasn't like that." Marcus finally spoke. "What was it like?" Karen turned toward him. Her voice cracked. "I thought the seats were empty." Marcus's eyes remained steady. "They weren't." Karen's shoulders slumped slightly. The fight was leaving her. One of the officers pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click echoed louder than it should have. Karen stared at the cuffs. "No," she whispered. Officer Brooks spoke gently. "Karen Whitmore, you are being detained for investigation of fraud, theft of corporate property, and filing a false police report." The words seemed to suck the air out of her lungs. The officer stepped closer. "Please turn around." Karen looked toward Marcus again. Her expression shifted suddenly. Desperation. "Mr. Carter," she said. The entire gate area leaned closer. Marcus didn't move. "You can fix this," she pleaded. Jordan raised an eyebrow. Karen's voice trembled. "I made a mistake." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "You made several." Karen's eyes filled. "I have a mortgage." Marcus's voice stayed calm. "You also tried to have us arrested." The officer gently took her arm. Karen twisted slightly toward Marcus again. "Please." Marcus shook his head once. "You didn't make a mistake," he said quietly. "You made a choice." The cuffs closed around her wrists with a sharp click. A ripple of whispers passed through the crowd. Phones tilted forward to capture the moment. Rick Dalton stepped farther back, trying to blend into the wall behind him. Officer Brooks noticed. "Rick," he said. Rick looked up. "Yes, sir. You want to explain why you shoved a passenger earlier?" Rick swallowed. "I was backing up the gate supervisor." Marcus glanced toward him. Jordan leaned closer again. "That guy's about to have a real bad day." The officers began leading Karen away through the concourse. Her uniform still carried the Skybridge Airlines logo. But now her hands were cuffed behind her back. Passengers stepped aside as she passed. Some stared. Some shook their heads. Some filmed every step. Arthur Langley wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. "Mr. Carter," he said quietly. Marcus turned toward him. "I don't know what to say." Marcus shrugged slightly. "Clean house." Langley nodded immediately. "We will." Jordan stretched his arms over his head, the tension finally beginning to drain out of his shoulders. "You hear that?" he said to Marcus. "Dad grounded half the airport, and she still managed to get herself arrested." Marcus almost smiled. Around them the terminal had shifted again. The anger about the cancelled flight was still there. But now the mood carried something else. Understanding. Passengers whispered to one another. That's the woman who tried to frame them. She sold the seats. She called the police on them. Mr. Harrison approached slowly. The businessman no longer looked impatient. He looked embarrassed. "Gentlemen," he said quietly. Jordan turned toward him. Marcus waited. Harrison cleared his throat. "I owe you an apology." Jordan tilted his head. "For what?" Harrison glanced briefly toward the empty check-in counters far down the concourse. "I saw what happened earlier," he said, "and I assumed she was right." Marcus studied him. Harrison continued. "I run a hedge fund. I pride myself on reading people." He looked at Marcus's hoodie, then at his own suit. "Today I read the room wrong." Jordan nodded slightly. "Happens." Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "I know you don't need my help," he said. "But if you ever run a project or charity that could use support," Marcus took the card. "James Harrison, Managing Partner. Harrison Capital." Marcus slipped it into his pocket. "We might take you up on that." Harrison nodded. "Please do." He stepped aside. Jordan watched him walk away. "That guy writes big checks," he murmured. Marcus glanced at the departure board. Flight SB402 now displayed one word. "Cancelled." Jordan followed his gaze. "So," he said. "What now?" Marcus pulled out his phone. A message blinked on the screen. "From Dad. Corporate jet arrives in 2 hours. Go to the lounge." Jordan smiled. "I like that plan." Marcus looked around the terminal one last time. The place that had nearly thrown them out an hour earlier now parted around them like a quiet tide. Passengers stepped aside, not out of fear, out of realization. Jordan picked up the duffel bag. "Come on," he said. "Let's go somewhere with better coffee." They turned and walked down the concourse toward the private lounge. Behind them, the echo of Karen Whitmore's collapse still rippled through the terminal. But Marcus Carter knew something else too. The story wasn't over yet. Not even close. The walk down the concourse felt strangely quiet. Not because the airport had calmed down. If anything, the opposite was true. Every screen near the gates still flashed delay notices. Clusters of passengers argued with airline agents. Phones rang non-stop. Somewhere farther down the terminal, a child was crying while a frustrated father tried to rebook a missed connection. But around Marcus and Jordan Carter, space opened. People moved aside. Some pretended not to stare. Others didn't bother pretending at all. Word had already spread. Jordan noticed it first when a group of travelers, standing near a coffee stand, suddenly fell silent as they passed. "That's them," one woman whispered. Another voice replied softly, "The owner's sons." Jordan leaned closer to Marcus as they walked. "Feels weird," he murmured. Marcus kept his pace steady. "You get used to it." They passed a large television mounted near the terminal ceiling. A news channel played with the sound muted. The banner across the screen read, "Breaking News." The footage showed shaky cell phone video from Gate B14, Karen Whitmore shouting, Marcus and Jordan standing calmly. Then the moment Captain Reed announced the cancellation. Jordan glanced up. "Well," he said, "that escalated fast." Marcus followed his gaze. The video cut to another clip, Karen being escorted through the terminal in handcuffs. The anchor's lips moved silently. Jordan whistled under his breath. That didn't take long. They continued walking toward the far end of the terminal, where the premium lounges were located. The carpet became thicker, the lighting softer. The noise from the main concourse faded behind glass walls and polished marble. The Diamond Horizon lounge stood ahead of them, guarded by a tall glass desk where a young attendant checked entry passes. When she looked up and saw them approaching, her expression froze for half a second. Not because she recognized them, because of the phone in her hand. The screen displayed the same video clip from the news. She quickly locked the screen and straightened. "Welcome to the Diamond Horizon Lounge," she said politely. Marcus handed over his phone. The attendant scanned the boarding pass. The system beeped once. Green. Her eyes flicked back to Marcus, then to Jordan, then back to the screen. Recognition began to form. Jordan noticed. "Don't worry," he said lightly. "We're not here to cancel anything." The attendant let out a nervous laugh. "Of course not." She stepped aside quickly. "Please enjoy the lounge." Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from the chaos outside. Soft piano music drifted through the room. Leather chairs lined the windows, overlooking the runway. A long buffet counter displayed salads, pastries, and warm meals beneath polished silver lids. Only a handful of travelers sat inside, most of them older, most of them wealthy enough to fly often, and almost all of them had already heard the story. Several conversations stopped the moment Marcus and Jordan entered. Jordan grabbed 2 sparkling waters from the bar and handed one to Marcus. "Not bad," he said. They took seats near the large window overlooking the runway. Outside, dozens of aircraft sat motionless on the tarmac. A Skybridge jet slowly taxied past before stopping abruptly near a service lane. Jordan leaned back in his chair. "You think Dad's serious about grounding the rest of the flights?" Marcus took a sip of water. "Depends how fast Langley moves." Jordan nodded toward the runway. "That storm system over the Atlantic isn't going anywhere." Marcus glanced outside. Dark clouds had begun forming along the horizon. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The adrenaline from the confrontation was fading now. Jordan broke the silence. "You know what's crazy?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "If we were just regular passengers." He didn't finish the sentence. Marcus didn't need him to. They both knew how that story usually ended. A security report, a pair of handcuffs, maybe a night in a holding cell, and Karen Whitmore would have gone home thinking she protected the airline. Jordan exhaled slowly. "Man." Marcus leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "That's exactly why Dad reacted the way he did." Jordan nodded. "I get it." Across the lounge, an older couple whispered while glancing in their direction. The man finally stood up and walked over. Late 60s, grey hair, a calm face weathered by years of boardroom negotiations. He stopped beside their table. "Gentlemen," he said. Marcus looked up. "Yes?" "I wanted to say something." Jordan gestured toward an empty chair. "Go ahead." The man remained standing. "My name is Walter Bennett," he said. "Retired airline executive." Marcus nodded politely. Bennett looked out toward the runway before continuing. "I spent 40 years in this industry." He turned back toward Marcus. And I've seen exactly what happened to you today, more times than I care to admit." Jordan tilted his head slightly. Bennett sighed. "People think aviation is about aircraft and logistics." He shook his head. "It's really about power." Marcus listened quietly. Bennett continued. "The people who look like they belong get the benefit of the doubt." His eyes moved toward Marcus's hoodie. "The ones who don't get interrogated." Jordan gave a dry laugh. "Sounds familiar." Bennett nodded. "What your father did today, grounding those flights, that's going to send a shockwave through every airline in the country." Marcus leaned back slightly. "That was the point." Bennett smiled faintly. "I figured." He extended a hand. "Your father's building a reputation for something this industry needs." Marcus shook his hand. "What's that?" Bennett answered without hesitation. "Accountability." He nodded once toward them both and returned to his seat. Jordan watched him go. "I like that guy." Marcus glanced at his phone. A new message had arrived. From Langley. "Corporate jet landing in 15 minutes. Car waiting at private terminal." Jordan stood immediately. "Well," he said, grabbing the duffel bag, "looks like we're flying after all." Marcus stood beside him. They walked toward the lounge exit. Behind them, the televisions continued replaying the video from Gate B14. Karen Whitmore shouting. Captain Reed cancelling the flight. The moment everything changed. But Marcus knew something the news anchors didn't yet understand. The real impact of what happened that afternoon wasn't about one cancelled flight. It was about a message now traveling across every airline office in the country. A message that said one thing very clearly. Some mistakes cost more than a ticket, and some judgments destroy entire careers. 15 minutes later, the black SUV rolled quietly through a restricted service gate on the far side of Denver International Airport. The main terminal disappeared behind them, swallowed by the long concrete swoon of the airfield. Out here, the noise of the passenger world faded. No crowds, no rolling luggage. Only the low mechanical hum of aircraft engines and the sharp winter wind sweeping across miles of open runway. Jordan Carter leaned forward slightly in the back seat and watched the line of parked jets stretch into the distance. "Now this," he said, "is a lot calmer than Gate B14. Marcus sat beside him, one arm resting against the window. The adrenaline from earlier had finally burned out, leaving behind a quiet exhaustion. Outside the SUV window, the private aviation terminal came into view, a smaller building of glass and steel sitting apart from the chaos of commercial travel. No security lines, no boarding announcements, just a few ground crew members moving efficiently across the tarmac. The SUV slowed as it approached the hangar ramp. Parked in front of the terminal was a sleek Gulfstream G650. Its engines were already running. The tail number ended in RC1. Jordan whistled softly. Dad flew in himself. Marcus smiled faintly. Looks like it. The SUV stopped beside the aircraft stairs. The driver stepped out and opened the rear door. Cold air rushed in immediately. Marcus and Jordan stepped onto the concrete. The wind carried the distant roar of departing commercial jets somewhere across the field. But here, at the private terminal, everything felt strangely controlled. At the top of the jet stairs stood a tall figure in a dark cashmere coat. Richard Carter. 6'4", broad shoulders, late 50s, the kind of presence that filled a room without effort. He walked down the steps before either of his sons could say a word. His eyes moved quickly across them both. Checking, looking for injuries. "Are you all right?" Marcus nodded. "We're fine." Richard pulled Jordan into a quick hug. "The guard pushed you," he said. Jordan shrugged. "I've had worse in college basketball." Richard's jaw tightened slightly. Marcus noticed. "Langley handled it," Marcus said. Richard nodded once. "I saw the footage." Jordan blinked. "You were watching?" "Every camera feed from the airport," Richard replied calmly. They climbed the stairs together. Inside the jet, the cabin smelled faintly of espresso and polished wood. Cream leather seats lined both sides of the aisle. A small dining table sat near the center of the cabin, already set with glasses. Jordan dropped the duffel bag beside one of the seats. "This beats commercial." Richard poured 3 glasses of sparkling water from a crystal bottle. He handed one to Marcus, one to Jordan, then sat across from them. The jet began rolling slowly toward the runway. Outside the windows, the vast airport stretched beneath a gray sky. Richard leaned forward slightly. "I want you to understand something." Marcus listened quietly. "What happened today," Richard continued, "was not just about you." Jordan took a sip of water. "It felt pretty personal." Richard nodded. "It was." He rested his hands on the table. "But if I allow employees in my company to treat my own family like criminals—" He paused. "What does that say about how they treat everyone else?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to. Richard looked toward the window. "Langley sent me the audit report." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "Already?" "Preliminary results." Marcus leaned forward. "And?" Richard's eyes hardened. "She's been running the same scam for 2 years." Jordan blinked. 2 years? Richard nodded. "Selling upgrades, pocketing cash, bullying passengers who questioned it." Marcus shook his head slowly. "That's why she panicked when we showed up." "Yes." The jet turned onto the runway. The engines grew louder. Jordan leaned back in his seat. "What happens to her now?" Richard answered without hesitation. "The district attorney is charging her with multiple counts of fraud." Jordan winced slightly. "That's serious?" Richard looked at him. "When you steal from a corporation and involve law enforcement in a false report—" He paused. "It becomes a felony." Marcus stared at the runway lights passing beneath the window. "How long?" Richard's voice was flat. 5 to 7 years, if the charges stick." Jordan whistled quietly. The engines roared. The jet accelerated down the runway. Within seconds, the ground fell away beneath them. Denver International Airport shrank into a pattern of lights and concrete far below. Marcus looked down at the place where the entire confrontation had started. From 30,000 feet, it looked peaceful, almost harmless. Jordan leaned his head back against the seat. "So," he said. "What about Rick?" Richard didn't even hesitate. "Fired." Jordan laughed once. "That fast? I called the CEO of his security company while we were taxiing." Marcus glanced toward his father. "And?" Richard shrugged slightly. "He will not work security in any facility connected to my companies again." The cabin grew quiet for a moment. The jet climbed through the clouds. Sunlight broke through the grey sky, filling the cabin with warm light. Jordan looked over at Marcus. "You realize this whole thing started because of a hoodie?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah." Richard watched them both. That hoodie made someone comfortable enough to reveal exactly who they were. Marcus nodded slowly. And who they weren't. Richard leaned back in his seat. "You know what the real result of today will be?" Jordan shrugged. "News cycle?" Richard shook his head. "Training manuals?" Marcus looked up. Richard continued. "Every airline executive in this country is watching this story tonight." He took a sip of water. "And tomorrow morning, they will be rewriting policies." Jordan smiled. "Not bad for one cancelled flight." Richard raised his glass slightly. "No." His eyes moved toward the horizon outside the jet window. "Not bad at all." The Gulf Stream climbed steadily above the clouds, leaving the grey sky of Colorado behind. Sunlight flooded the cabin. For the first time that day, the world felt quiet. Marcus Carter leaned back in the leather seat and looked out the oval window. From 30,000 feet, the earth below looked simple. No shouting passengers, no flashing airport lights, no arguments about who belonged where. Just clouds stretching across the horizon like an endless white ocean. Jordan sat across from him, finally relaxed. He had kicked off his sneakers and stretched his legs toward the aisle. "You know," he said after a while, "that whole thing still feels unreal." Marcus glanced over. "What part?" Jordan laughed softly. "All of it." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. 1 minute we're standing at a check-in counter, getting called thugs. The next minute Dad cancels an international flight. Marcus smiled faintly. "Yeah." Richard Carter sat across the table from them both. The calm expression on his face had not changed since they boarded, but the tension in his eyes was gone now. "That's the thing about power," he said quietly. Jordan looked up. "People think power is loud." Richard shook his head. "Real power is quiet until it isn't." Marcus watched the sunlight reflecting off the polished table. "What happens at the airport now?" Richard shrugged slightly. "Langley will clean it up." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "You really grounded the entire Denver hub for 4 hours?" Richard nodded. "Yes." Jordan let out a low whistle. "That's going to cost a lot of money." Richard's voice stayed calm. "Money is easy to replace." Marcus looked toward him. "Reputation isn't." Richard smiled slightly. "Exactly." The jet leveled off above the clouds. A flight attendant appeared from the forward galley and placed a tray on the table. Fresh fruit, coffee, warm bread. The quiet luxury of private aviation. Jordan grabbed a piece of bread and leaned back again. "You know what the craziest part is?" Marcus looked at him. "If we didn't have your number in our phones today," Jordan said. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Richard understood immediately. "You would have been escorted out of that terminal," he said. Marcus nodded slowly. "And the report would say we caused the problem." Jordan pointed toward the window. "And Karen Whitmore would still be running that counter tomorrow." Richard took a sip of coffee. "That's why I didn't let the flight leave." Marcus looked at him. I figured. Richard set the cup down. Sometimes the only way to expose a broken system, he paused, is to stop the system completely. Jordan leaned his head back against the seat. Well, he said, mission accomplished. Outside the window, the sky stretched endlessly blue. Below them, the Rocky Mountains appeared like distant shadows beneath the clouds. Marcus sat quietly for a moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the business card Mr. Harrison had given him earlier. James Harrison, managing partner, Harrison Capital. Jordan noticed. You thinking about that foundation idea? Marcus nodded. Yeah. Richard raised an eyebrow. What foundation? Marcus looked at him. For kids who want to get into aviation. Jordan smiled. Pilots, engineers, mechanics. Marcus turned the card slowly between his fingers. Kids who grow up being told they don't belong near a cockpit. Richard leaned back in his seat. And you want to change that? Marcus nodded. In 20 years, I want someone walking up to a first-class counter in a hoodie. He paused, and the person behind the desk looks just like them. Richard's expression softened. That's a goal worth funding. Jordan laughed. Funding won't be a problem. Richard raised his glass slightly. No. They clinked their glasses together. The quiet sound echoed softly through the cabin. The jet continued across the sky. Far below them, the airport where everything had started was already shrinking into memory. Karen Whitmore was sitting in a holding room somewhere in Denver, waiting to face the consequences of decisions she had made in less than 20 minutes. Rick Dalton was likely cleaning out his locker. Arthur Langley was rewriting policy manuals. And somewhere in airline boardrooms across the country, executives were already discussing what had happened that afternoon. Because stories like this travel fast, especially when they expose something deeper than one person's mistake. Marcus looked out the window again. The clouds stretched endlessly beneath the aircraft. Up here, the world felt different, calmer. But the lesson from the ground remained clear. Never judge someone by the clothes they wear. Never assume you know someone's story. And never forget that respect is the one thing every person deserves the moment they walk through a door. The Carter jet continued west through the afternoon sky. A quiet aircraft carrying a story that would soon reach millions of people. And if this story meant something to you, if you believe respect should never depend on appearance, take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel so more stories like this can be told. Then drop 3 simple words in the comments. Respect over appearances.